8, I need to keep working on that definition of what it means to be powerful so that I can sort of clarify it, right? So I can kind of mold it and it holds less of a grip on me. And I realize that being truly powerful means that I can be loving and caring and accepting of people as well and not just controlling them, right? So that's kind of the second step, is working with that quality. But each of them also has what I call an accelerator, okay? A fundamental practice that kind of gets at the heart of what's going on here and really helps to accelerate the growth of the core quality. At point 9, that accelerator is what I call generativity, right? So generativity is the term that Erik Erikson used to describe sort of the grandparenting stage of life, right, where you now are helping the next generation grow, right? You become a mentor, you become a servant in some way, but it's sort of a selfless attempt to help the next generation grow and develop. So with my clients who are 9s, I very often have them mentor someone else, okay, to help them grow. And this is the process of generativity, and it starts to make them feel kind of okay about themselves again, right? So the accelerator for point 9 is generativity, kind of giving back, growing the next generation. At point 1, the accelerator is acceptance. Okay? Ones need to learn to accept the world as it is without getting angry about the world being as it is. Now, this doesn't mean resignation, right? I'm not suggesting to the one that they just say, oh, well, that's how it is. You can't change anything. You just have to live with things as they are. No, what we're saying is that emotionally you have to accept things objectively, right, without a lot of heat or disappointment or anger. And that allows you to then objectively start to make changes in the world that you'd like to see, right? But if we keep getting angry and refuse to accept things as they are, then we really can't do anything about them, and we'll never be objective, okay? For point 2, the core quality is empathy, okay? Now, we often think that 2s are very empathic people, and to some extent they are, but very often one of the challenges that 2s face is that they're often projecting needs onto other people. They're often kind of assuming that somebody needs something. You know, it's I'm cold, so you must be cold too, and I'm going to give you a blanket, is the, kind of the attitude sometimes that 2s fall into. So what 2s need to learn to do is actually practice empathy, which is truly understanding what the other person is feeling, okay? The way to get real compassion is almost to sort of step back and objectively get a sense of what the other person is feeling. Very often I tell 2s that, you know what, before you just assume what somebody needs, ask them, what are you feeling now? Instead of saying, oh, you're probably feeling blank, okay? No, ask them. And this is the empathy that allows true compassion to grow. Okay. Point 3, the core quality is value, and what the accelerator is understanding purpose, developing some sort of purpose in life. Very often what's happening with the 3 is that they're doing and they're doing and they're doing, and they're like the hamster in the wheel, right? They just keep doing and doing, but never feeling like they're getting anywhere, never understanding what the bigger purpose of their activities are. So by starting to take some time and think about, okay, how do I fit into the bigger picture here? How do I start to ensure that I'm being something bigger than myself? Okay, what is my purpose in life? And so I instruct the 3 to write down a purpose statement. Okay, now what often happens with 3s is their purpose is, initially to start a company or to do this or to do that. It's very action-oriented, and you kind of have to step them back and say, okay, that's great, but let's look bigger, let's look broader. How about the community? What kind of legacy are you going to leave? That sort of thing. Okay. Point 4, the accelerator is what I call individuation, and it's very similar to Jung's concept around this of sort of detaching and becoming our own person. But specifically what I work with 4s around is to stop with comparison and contrasting of themselves to other people, right? To recognize when they're trapped in some comparison of themselves to their others, particularly, say, their parents or somebody influential. Because what that demonstrates when the 4 is doing that is that they are not individual in that case. They're actually just attached and identified with that other person. And so by learning to recognize, oh, I'm doing this comparison again, and just letting go of it, they start to become comfortable just being their own person instead of having to prove how different they are. Okay. Point 5, the practice is what I just conscious, deliberate practice. Intuition, naive intuition is one thing, right? We all have that, where we think we know what we're doing, but then there's expert intuition, which is the kind of intuition we get through constant practice of something, persistent practice of something. The examples I tend to use are around, any sort of physical activity that, hitting a tennis ball, for example. When you first learn to hit a tennis ball, there are all these mechanics that you have to pay attention to, all these, rules to how to do it right. And then the more you do it and the more you do it, the more natural it becomes, and it becomes intuitive, right? It's as with martial arts as well. You spend years and years consciously practicing these deliberate techniques, and then when you become a black belt and you start, you spar, you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just sort of doing it, right? So the path for the 5 is to go from, stunted, immature intuition to mature intuition through conscious practice. Okay. Point 6, in order to become confident, we need to start looking for evidence. We need to start identifying success we've had in the past. We need to sort of, one thing I'll do with 6s is I'll say, okay, if there's a particular thing they're afraid of, say it's, giving a presentation. Okay, well, what's the worst that could happen? And you give them some time to sort of work through, here's the worst that could happen, and say, okay, if that happens, what will you do? But then the main thing is we start to look at, have you ever done this before? Right? Have you been successful at it? Most of the time, they have done it before, and they've been successful. It's almost like 6s can develop amnesia around their own competence, right? So what you want to do is remind them of successes they've had, and then help them make that small leap from a past success to what they're trying to do now. Okay, so the way to get that kind of confidence is to find evidence of success in the past. 7s, in order to recapture and to nurture joy, they have to practice enjoyment. Now, when we think of 7s, we think of, they're happy all the time, and they're laughing, and they're smiling. Well, I live with 3 7s, and I can tell you that they're not happy and smiling all the time, right? And very often what a 7 is experiencing is frustration with my current experience and the desire for the next experience, right? So there's this disappointment very often, or a dissatisfaction that they feel with the current experience. And so 7s need to learn to enjoy what they're doing, to stop and smell the roses, to extend their presence in an activity that they're doing. Okay? And what this does is allow them to calm down a little bit and let the joy of the moment come through instead of the frustration or disappointment with the moment and the questing after the next moment. Finally, point 8, in order to help the 8's vitality mature, what the 8 needs to do, or what we all need to do, is to engage in some kind of self-discipline, right? An example that I like to use is that the energy of the 8 is like a fire hose with no one holding on to it, right? It's just spraying all over the place and making a big mess. And through self-discipline, it's like putting hands on the fire hose. It's like controlling it and aiming it in a productive way. And what happens with the 8 is that when they feel like they're just making a big mess, then they start to shut down. That's when they start to feel dead inside. They say, I've got all this energy, and all I'm doing is making a mess, right? But when they learn to channel the energy, when they learn to do that through self-discipline, when they learn to submit to some practice or something larger than themselves, this is when the vitality of the 8 really comes out and starts to mature. So that's the 9 accelerators.
Those 9 accelerators, I just love them. I was listening very closely to each one, and because what I wanted to listen for in them was, if you told a person these accelerators, is there a way that they could just commit to doing them practically as opposed to that it's some kind of conceptual thing that they, framework that they need to try to, and I really did feel that each one was some very, to use your word, pragmatic thing that they could do that would begin, accelerate the changes, the maturation process that you're talking about. And I wanted to just say to, our listeners, particularly those who are coming to the Enneagram for the first time, that, you are going to hear from the different teachers different terminology and different language sometimes for qualities, core qualities, essential qualities, obstacles, obstructions. And I would just encourage you, for instance, Mario is using the word intuition for the 5, which I really think is in my experience, it's accurate. But of course, many people don't use that word for the essential quality of a 5. They would use something like clarity or, knowing or something like that. But I noticed even in the different languaging as you were talking that, it's obvious that there's a coherence around the energetics of these things. So I just want to encourage the listeners to kind of listen for the actual, shall we say, structure and dynamic of these things, even though the words may be a little different with each of the teachers. And I think, Mari, you seem to be a person who's very thoughtful and systematic. So I'm sure that you've listened to a lot of the other teachers, and you've really tried to discern languaging here that, again, keeps the person, shall we say, moving, keeps the person in mobility rather than stops them sort of with a sense of